أبا الحسن يا علي يا ابن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها القادم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا يا أبا الحسن يا علي يا ابن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا يا أبا الحسن يا علي يا ابن محمد أيها الحادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله حاجات يا ساداتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم الفقر وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي عند الله وستنقذوني من ذنوب عند الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو النجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا ساداتي يا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين ولعن الله وأعداء الله ظالميهم من الأولين والآخرين آمين رب العالمين. سورة مباركة الفاتحة.
اور محمد وآل محمد صلوات. کربل کی کہانی جب کوئی بھی سنائے گا دل والوں کی آنکھوں سے ایک دریا بہائے گا وہ کارواں سرور کا جو شانوں سے نکلا تھا سغرا کو خبر کیا تھی نہ لوٹ کے آئے گا مہمان بلایا ہے اے کوفی و سرور کو کیا کنبا شہدی کا پانی نہیں پائے گا پامال ہوا قاسم یوں گھوڑوں کی ٹاپوں سے کس طرح چچا تیری میت کو اٹھائے گا تھا ہاتھوں کا کٹنے کا کچھ غم نہ دلاور ہو سیدانیوں کا پردہ اب کون بچائے گا؟ ٹوٹی ہے کمر شہ کی گھبرانا مگر اکبر، فرزند نبی تیری لاشے کو اٹھائے گا۔ سوتے نہ تم اصغر جھولے میں تڑپتے تھے، دنیا کو خبر کیا تھی ایک تیر سلائے گا۔ کربل کی کہانی جب کوئی بھی سنائے گا۔ صلو علی النبی۔
محمد وآل محمد۔ فاتحہ۔ غربت میں اٹھ رہا ہے جنازہ غریب کا، غربت میں اٹھ رہا ہے جنازہ غریب کا، ارض و سما میں شور ہے برپا غریب کا، انگور زہردار اترتے ہی حلق سے، انگور زہردار اترتے ہی حلق سے، ہے ہوا ہے قلب دوپارہ غریب کا، کوئی نہ تھا کرے جو کفالت امام کی، کوئی نہ تھا کرے جو کفالت امام کی، لاشا تخی نے آ کے اٹھایا غریب کا، کیوں پھٹ کے آسمانا اس غم میں گر پڑے، ماتم ہے آج خلد میں برپا غریب کا، کہتے ہیں سر کو پیٹ کے سب بے کس و غریب، سر سے ہمارے اٹھ گیا سایہ غریب کا، درود بر محمد و آل محمد۔ اے سرور ذیشان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اے فاطمہ کی جان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اے سرور ذیشان خدا حافظ و ناصر۔ اب اگلے برس آپ یہاں آئیں گے آقا، جیتے رہے خادم تو تمہیں پائیں گے آقا، کچھ شرط غلامی کا بجا لائیں گے آقا، ہے شیعوں کے مہمان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اے فاطمہ کی جان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اے جان و دل احمد مختار سدھارو، اے بے کسوں کے قافلہ سالار سدھارو، خالق کی امائے شہ ابرار سدھارو، اللہ نگہبان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اے سرور ذیشان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اے خاصم اکبر جرار سدھارو، اے حضرت عباس علمدار سدھارو، اے گنچا دہن بانوں کے دلدار سدھارو، اے اصغر نادان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اے سرور ذیشان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اب کاہے کو تشریف یہاں لائے گی زہرا، اب کاہے کو یا بز میں عزا ہوئے گی برپا، اب کاہے کو یا ہوگا عزاداروں کا آنا، گھر ہو گیا سنسان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اے سرور ذیشان خدا حافظ و ناصر، اے فاطمہ کی جان خدا حافظ و ناصر۔ صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم۔
Brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum. Condolences to all of you on the wafat of our Holy Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and Imam Raza alayhi salam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Alhamdulillah, we're honored to have Sayyid Muhammad Sadiq Kazwini with us tonight to bless us with our lecture, inshallah. He is a senior at UCLA, majoring in political science and Middle Eastern studies. Being raised in the holy city of Karbala, Sayyid Muhammad studied in the Islamic seminary under Ayatollah Sayyid Murtaza al-Kazwini and Sayyid Hussein al-Kazwini. Along with being heavily involved on campus, he is part of multiple local and national organizations aimed at empowering Muslim youth in America. So let's welcome him with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا عبرة كل مؤمن ومؤمنة يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. عن الإمام الحجة المهدي عجل الله تعالى فرجه أنه قال: لم يمتثل أمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله في الهادين بعد الهادين، والأمة مصرة على مقته، مجتمعة على قطيعة رحمه وإقصاء ولده، إلا القليل ممن وفى لرعاية الحق فيهم، فقتل من قتل، وسبي من سبي، وأقصي من أقصي، وجرى القضاء لهم بما يرجى له حسن المثوبة، إذ كانت الأرض لله يورثها من يشاء من عباده والعاقبة للمتقين. For health and safety, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. For the love of our eighth Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa Ridha, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. And for the love of Habibi Ilahi al-Alameen Abil Qasim Muhammad, with the loudest of your voices. Brothers and sisters, عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا برسول الله وبالإمام علي بن موسى الرضا عليهم السلام. We offer our sincerest condolences to the Imam of our time on the departure of Rasulullah and Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha. On such a night, on such an evening, on the year 11th of Hijrah, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi was laying in bed, spending his last moments with his family, Fatima al-Zahra, Amir al-Mu'mineen, and his grandchildren. When we look back to the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, we see that it is a life characterized by immense success. And that is not only according to the Muslim view, but according to historians. In fact, if we look to the best-selling book, which is titled The 100, a ranking of the most influential persons in history, we see that Michael Hart, the author, asserts that his criterion for the right ranking was based on how much the actions of these figures have changed the course of human history. And we see that he has ranked the Prophet ﷺ as the number one ranking figure, meaning that the Prophet's actions in this life were the most influential in human history. But at the same time, when we look at the life of the Prophet, we see that it was a life that witnessed an unwitnessed and unparalleled amounts of attacks, of hatred by non-Muslims and by his very own people at the same time. It was a very challenging life, a life that you and I cannot really bear. And to provide us with the scope of attacks and challenges that the Prophet ﷺ experienced, he says in a hadith, مَا أُوذِيَ نَبِيٌّ مِثْلَ مَا أُوذِيتُ. No prophet has ever been hurt as much as I have. It is no secret how damaged and how hurt the prophets were in their times. Every single prophet dealt with challenges. Yet the Prophet ﷺ, although he spent 23 years, he asserts that he was the most hurt by his very own community at the same time. But why? Why is it that the Prophet was the most hurt, the most damaged of all other prophets? Why did he receive such a horrendous amount of attacks? Why was it? What were the types of attacks that the Prophet ﷺ had to endure? So brothers and sisters, we need to analyze this and see why was the Prophet and why did the Prophet say, مَا أُوذِيَ نَبِيٌّ مِثْلَ مَا أُوذِيتُ. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. The types of attacks that occurred and the Prophet had to endure can be categorized into multiple categories. The first that we can put are the verbal attacks that occurred to the Prophet. From the very first day when the Prophet ﷺ announced to the people of Mecca, to Quraysh, to abolish Jahiliyyah and to embrace Islam, the verbal attacks began. From calling him prior to that, from calling him as-sadiq al-amin, the truthful and the honest, they began their vile attacks and vicious attacks, creating nicknames for the Prophet ﷺ. We see multiple verses in the Quran illustrate some of the nicknames that were given to the Prophet. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أَكَانَ لِلنَّاسِ عَجَبًا أَنْ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ رَجُلٍ مِّنْهُمْ أَنْ أَنذِرِ النَّاسِ وَبَشِّرِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَنَّ لَهُمْ قَدَمَ صِدْقٍ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ قَالَ الْكَافِرُونَ إِنَّ هَذَا لَسَاحِرٌ مُبِينٌ. Is it a marvel for mankind that we have sent revelation unto a man from amongst themselves, saying, warn mankind and give glad tidings to those who believe? The disbelievers say, surely this is a manifest sorcerer. He was called a sorcerer. إِذْ يَقُولُ الظَّالِمُونَ إِن تَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا رَجُلٌ مَسْعُورٌ. You follow not but a bewitched man, a sorcerer and bewitched. Another ayah says, بَلْ قَالُوا أَضْغَاثُ أَحْلَامٍ بَلْ افْتَرَاهُ بَلْ هُوَ شَاعِرٌ. Confused dreams, a fabricator, a poet. In another ayah it says a crazy teacher, insane, possessed. And they even attacked his family. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi lost his 2-year-old son Al-Qasim, the man called him what? Called him Abtar, the man without posterity. And that's why we see Surah Al-Kawthar, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar, as to Fatimat al-Zahra. And then it ends in Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And that's why the ayah came in the end, it says, Inna shani'aka huwa al-Abtar. To the person who called the Prophet Abtar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises that he will have no children and he will have no posterity. So this was the very first category that the mushrikeen attacked the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. However, once they realized that this is a universal message, this is a message that is unscathed by verbal attacks, they elevated the type of attacks. So they started what we can call a mental war against the Prophet. Since the Prophet came from Bani Hashim and came from Quraysh, Quraysh is the most important tribe and Bani Hashim is the most important clan from within Quraysh. They cannot just go up to him and attack him physically. So they went and they began a mental war. They began to attack his close companions, those who did not possess any status in society. We see in the case of Bilal, in the case of Ammar bin Yasir and his parents, Sumayya and Yasir, in the case of Suhaib bin Sinan, Abu Yahya, Umayr ibn Fuhayra, they were all subject to starvation, torture. They deprived them of food and water under the heat. And that was a test to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, seeing your closest companions being tortured. And some of them were killed, including Sumayya, who was the very first shaheed in Islam, whether it is a man or a woman. Sumayya, the mother of Ammar, was the very first shaheed under the hands of Abi Jahl, as he killed her because she became Muslim. That all took a mental toll on Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. It's a challenge to see your companions being hurt and killed. However, once they realize that all of this is not helping with their cause, they went and physically attacked the Prophet. And that's why we see Abu Lahab in the ayah, Tabbat yada Abi Lahab wa tab. He would walk behind the Prophet and throw rocks at him. And he was the Prophet's uncle. We see that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, when he went to Al-Ta'if, when he sought refuge to Ta'if, he was received by kids throwing rocks at him. These were the types of attacks that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi endured. However, there is a very understandable question, is that whatever we heard right now is not something uncommon in the stories of the prophets. We've all read and know about the stories of the prophets. We've all seen them tortured, their companions being tortured. Even some of them were killed. So what makes the pain that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi endured, the pain that he endured, so special? We see that every single prophet, the Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, كَذَلِكَ مَا أَتَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ مِنْ رَسُولٍ إِلَّا قَالُوا سَاحِرٌ أَوْ مَجْنُونَ. There came no messenger unto those before them, but that said, a sorcerer or one who is possessed. So every messenger in human history was called a sorcerer and someone who was possessed. And some of them had to deal with their ummah, had to deal with their people for a longer time, more than 23 years. The Quran says, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ فَلَبِثَ فِيهِمْ أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ إِلَّا 50 عَامًا. 950 years Nuh spent with his people. Some of them were imprisoned, like Nabiullah Yusuf. Ibrahim was catapulted into the fire. Musa lived in exile. Nabiullah Yaqub lost Yusuf and he lost his eyesight. And some were even killed, including Nabiullah Yahya. So why did Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi say, مَا أُوذِيَ نَبِيٌّ مِثْلَ مَا أُوذِيتَ? O Rasulullah, what was the pain that you had to suffer that made it so different? And the answer, brothers and sisters, is given to us by none other than the Imam of our time, Al-Imam Al-Hujjah. He says the commands of the Prophet regarding the Imams were not adhered to. لم يمتثل أمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله في الهادين بعد الهادين. And the Ummah were insistent on ignoring his command, united on cutting his family and eliminating them, except for a few righteous ones. And thus, they were killed, imprisoned, and held captive. When we look at the life of Rasulullah, 23 years he spent towards inviting people towards an eternal bliss. He asked for no reward. He never asked for money. He never asked for a throne, for status. He asked for one thing alone. And that was by an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it was, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. I ask not of you for any reward except affection for my family. Not only did they not get the affection, but they received hatred, animosity, attack after attack. We see even in the last week of the Prophet, What happened in the last week? They abandoned Usama. They abandoned his army, Usama's army. The calamity of Thursday happened. As-Saqifa after the Prophet. The annexation of Fadak. All of this in a period of 2-3 months. And the events did not stop after that. These type of events did not stop after that. When we look at every single Imam, we saw that they've experienced people who genuinely hated them. Imam Sadiq describes it, say, even if we gave them the sweetest of honey, they would still hate us. That's how much hate that some people had for the family of the Prophet. And that was the only reward that the Prophet ﷺ asked. From the civil wars that Amir al-Mu'mineen had to endure, to the poison that Imam al-Hasan had to endure, to the battle of Karbala, to Sham, to Bani Umayyah and Bani al-Abbas dealing with every single Imam, torturing them, killing them. And that is why we see Al-Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam says, Wallah ma minna illa masmumun aw maqtul. By Allah, each and every one of us is either poisoned or killed, meaning by sword. And when we look at the lives of the Imams, it is true. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib was killed by a sword. Imam al-Hasan poisoned. Imam al-Hussein in the battle of Karbala. Imam Zayn al-Abidin and so on and so forth, all of them were poisoned. Maqtulun aw masmoom. And the pain that each and every one of those Imams was added to the pain of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, because that was the only reward he asked for. And we know the status of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi as a dead man is the same as him alive. Bal ahya'un 'inda rabbihim yurzaqun. He's alive. So that is why the pain that the Imams endured, and the pain that Imam al-Hujjah alayhi salam, the pain that Imam al-Hujjah on a daily basis that he endures of al-ghayba is also added to the pain of Rasulullah. And that, brothers and sisters, is why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi endured more pain and continues to endure the pain than any other prophet before him. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As we mentioned, each and every Imam faced a unique set of challenges that they had to deal with during their time, and they had to deal with hostilities aimed at eliminating them and extinguishing them, including Imam al-Ridha. Most historians indicate that Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam was martyred by poison on the 29th of Safar, meaning tomorrow is going to be the 28th, on Thursday. That will be the day, the anniversary of the istishhad of Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam. And I'd like to focus our attention in this part of the lecture on some of the challenges that Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam endured. And this was an added pain to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. When we look at the life of Imam al-Ridha, at first glance, some might say that Imam didn't really face that many challenges, because at the end of the day, Imam al-Ridha, not common amongst the Imams, but Imam al-Ridha was the crown prince to the throne. He was the crown prince. So why would the crown prince be enduring challenges and pain? It must have been, a lavish, fun life without any challenges. And that is a very good question. I mean, if you think of the term crown prince, what would you think? You would think of someone living in a palace, right? But that is at first glance. But when we analyze the life of the Imam, we see that the threats posed to the Imam and the challenges that the Imam faced were perhaps the most difficult because they were unique. And inshallah, we'll explain in a bit. So, and I'd like to focus specifically on the years 196 of Al-Hijrah to the year 203, which was the year that the Imam was martyred. So what happened in the year 196? So it was a couple years after the death of Al-Harun al-Rashid. All of us know Al-Harun al-Rashid. The Abbasid Caliph was notorious for killing the Shias. Al-Harun split his territories into two, East and West. He gave the East to his son Al-Ma'mun, and the East included Khurasan. And he gave the West, which included Baghdad, as to his son Al-Amin. So he had two sons, Al-Ma'mun and Al-Amin. However, we all know the Abbasids, and we all know how greedy they were for power. So after the death of their father, there was a civil war between the two brothers over having the entire territory. Eventually, Al-Ma'mun was able to defeat and behead his own brother, Al-Amin. So at that point, civil unrest began. You may ask why. So Al-Ma'mun was in charge of ruling the East after the death of his father, which included Khurasan. So when he took over Baghdad and the West, people thought of him as a foreigner, someone who doesn't deserve to rule us because he was a foreigner. I mean, you're with the Persians, not with us. That was their thought process. So what happened was Al-Ma'mun, even though he won the civil war, he was facing a crisis, an existential crisis. His legitimacy was on the line. So that is why he needed a plan to legitimize himself. So he thought to himself, who is a better man than Imam Ali ibn Musa Ridha? He's well respected, people know him, and if he becomes my crown prince, people would think of me as the legitimate ruler, because the Imam, Al-Imam al-Ridha, even if they weren't the followers of Ahlul-Bayt, people had respect for the Imam. So that is why he thought of this plan of appointing Al-Imam al-Ridha as the crown prince. Now you ask, why Imam al-Ridha? We know that he is, legitimate and people respect him and revere him. But doesn't Al-Ma'mun hate Al-Imam al-Ridha? I mean, he wants the throne for himself and he hates the Ahlul Bayt. And his father was notorious for killing Shi'as and the followers of Ahlul Bayt. So why would he appoint Al-Imam al-Ridha? And that is why we say that Al-Ma'mun was operating based on the idea of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Instead of having Al-Imam al-Ridha in Medina, he would now have him very close to him, be able to monitor everyone who comes and visits the Imam, monitor what the Imam says, what the Imam does. And Imam al-Ridha, at the end of the day, is the grandson of Imam al-Hussein. So they always thought of the battle of Karbala. And that's why they thought of Imam al-Ridha as a grave threat to the throne. And number three, it was a way for Al-Ma'mun to undermine the Imam. Because when we think of the Ahlul Bayt, when we look at their history, they were never in power, aside from the few years of Imam al-Hasan and Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, which are one of the fairest times in history. Aside from these few years, the Imams were never in power. They were amongst the people. And even when they took power, they were always empowering the lower classes and instituting justice and equity. So he thought by including the Imam, it would show people that, these Ahlul Bayt, they always claim to be pious and they don't want money and zuhd. However, when they have the chance, they will live in the palace and become the crown prince. So that was his thought process. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So they would essentially increase the legitimacy of the state because he would have Imam al-Ridha. He would keep Imam al-Ridha close, and also he would undermine the Imam himself. So 3 birds with 1 stone. And this is why I say that this is one of the Imam al-Ridha faced one of the most concerning challenges, because the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam were always with the people. It was a zero-sum game, and that's why we see in Karbala, the Imam revolted against Yazid, and there was a battle. But with Imam Ridha, it was made in a way that the Imam was forced to accept the crown, and it was in a way to undermine the Imam's legitimacy and to show that the Ahlul Bayt aren't really divine, don't really have al-isma. So that was the biggest challenge that was facing the Imam, of how do you navigate around that? Now, Imam al-Ridha is smarter than you and I, and smarter than everyone, and smarter than al-Ma'mun. So when al-Ma'mun offered the Imam the crown prince position, the Imam rejected. He said, I'm sorry. But al-Ma'mun began to threaten the Imam. He started making subtle threats, indicating that if you refuse this, I will kill you. At that point, what would the Imam do? He would obviously have to accept, but he accepts under strict conditions. Number one, he will only serve by name, meaning that he will not appoint governors, he will not attend cabinet meetings, he will not resolve disputes, he will not give out salaries. He is there by name and name only. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Because the Imam knows that if the Imam starts attending meetings and attends on behalf of al-Ma'mun, every good that comes out of the throne will be appreciated to who? Al-Ma'mun. And every bad and wrongdoing that happens, it will be blamed on the Imam. So the Imam knows that this is a tool to undermine the Ahlul Bayt. And that's why he made sure that even if he is forced to become crown prince, he will only become a crown prince by name. No political activity whatsoever. So Imam Ridha alayhi salam was forced to leave Medina and to go to Khurasan, where the palace, the presidential palace, or the caliph was living. But the Imam knew that this was going to be the last time he goes to Medina. The last time he leaves Medina. He will not be returning to Medina, because he knew deep down what a person al-Ma'mun is. And that al-Ma'mun had no genuine intentions for the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So when he left towards Medina, he made it clear to his family, including his sister, Sayyida Fatima al-Ma'suma, who we visit in Qom, who is buried in Qom. And he told her that this is my last time in al-Medina. And he went and bid his farewell to Rasulullah and to his ancestors in Medina and went towards Khurasan. Now, al-Ma'mun, normally the route from Medina to Khurasan is usually you go to Medina, you go through Iraq, Baghdad, and then you go north to Khurasan. But these areas, this route is a route filled with the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So when the Imam would pass, people would come and say salam to the Imam, celebrate the Imam. And it would be a message, a subtle message, that the reason why the Imam is going to Khurasan is to increase the legitimacy of the state. So al-Ma'mun doesn't want that to happen. He doesn't want to admit to the Imam that he is doing that to increase his own legitimacy and exploit the Imam's name. So what he does, he forces the Imam to go from Medina to Basra and then go from southern Iran, what we call now Iran, southern Iran, and go to Khurasan. So avoiding the places where the lovers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam are. And that is one of the vile actions of al-Ma'mun. He couldn't even stand people celebrating the Imam. That's how jealous he was and envious of the Imam he was. However, every city that the Imam alayhi salam would pass through, thousands and thousands of people would stop by to listen to what the Imam had to say. Because when you see an Imam, you can feel the Imam. It's not something, it's a divine thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instituted Imam al-Ridha as an Imam. And that's why when you meet an Imam, and that's why when we read the narrations, people could feel the Imam, the presence of the Imam. It's not something like you and I. So that is why we see that every city where the Imam alayhi salam would go, thousands of people would go just to listen to what the Imam would say. And that trip is where we read hadith Silsilat al-Dhahab, which is one of the most famous hadith given by any Imam. In the city of Nayshabur, they stopped. The city of Nayshabur is pretty close to Mashhad right now. It's approximately 20-25 kilometers away. So the Imam stopped by that city. And that city wasn't known for the love of Ahlul Bayt. Thousands of people stopped along the way to hear what the Imam would say. And the Imam said the gold chain, the hadith which is called the gold chain, Silsilat al-Dhahab, because the chain of narrators are all Imams. And I'll say it inshaAllah. It says that the Imam spoke to the people. He says, سمعت أبي موسى بن جعفر. I heard my father Musa ibn Ja'far. يقول سمعت أبي جعفر بن محمد. I heard جعفر بن محمد الإمام الصادق. يقول سمعت أبي محمد بن علي. الإمام الصادق heard الإمام الباقر. And الإمام الباقر سمعت أبي علي بن الحسين. Heard his father الإمام زين العابدين. يقول سمعت أبي الحسين بن علي. الإمام الحسين. سمعت أبي علي بن أبي طالب. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. So Imam al-Ridha heard from Imam Musa al-Kadhim. Imam Musa al-Kadhim heard from his father, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. Imam al-Sadiq heard from Imam al-Baqir. Imam al-Baqir heard from Imam Zayn al-Abidin. Imam Zayn al-Abidin and Imam al-Husayn. Imam al-Husayn and Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen heard Rasulullah. Rasulullah heard Jibreel, and Jibreel heard Allah. This is a hadith Qudsi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا إله إلا الله حصني فمن دخل أمن من عذابي. The phrase لا إله إلا الله is my fortress, and whoever enters my fortress will be saved. And then the Imam moves. All of a sudden, the Imam on his camel pauses, looks back to the people and says, بِشَرْطِهَا وَشُرُوطِهَا, with its terms and conditions, وَأَنَا مِن شُرُوطِهَا, and my imamah is one of these conditions. So in order to enter the fortress of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Imam indicates, is that you have to believe in the imamah, and I am one of the Imams. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. So we see that even moments before the Imam would assume the crown prince title, he was not shy of saying what is right. He would say that I am the Imam and you must believe in me. But the Imam didn't want the throne. There's a difference between becoming a caliph and the Imam. The Imam is instilled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't care for the materialistic world. But the Imam was never shy of saying that he is the Imam, and that it is one of the conditions to believe in the Imam to enter the fortress of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once the Imam arrived in Khurasan, in Mashhad nowadays, he continued to spread his knowledge. And it is recorded that the Imam continuously and very frequently had debates and discussions with other scholars, with other Sunni scholars, with scholars from different faiths, Christians and Jews. And they would be friendly discussions and sometimes debates. And the Imam would always win. In every instance, the Imam would win. And day by day, the Imam started to get traction. People started to look at the Imam and say, this is the rightful Imam. This is the Imam who should be on the throne, not the man who killed his very own brother for the sake of this throne. So they started to compare the Imam with Al-Ma'mun. Al-Ma'mun, the person who killed his brother for the throne, and you have the Imam on the other side who was offered to wield such political power, but he refused. Because he knows what the goals are. So people started to compare them, and the Imam started to receive traction. And the idea that Al-Ma'mun had of undermining the legitimacy of Imam al-Ridha by having him as crown prince to show that the Ahlul Bayt are not truthful and are not pious, that mission failed because the Imam started getting traction and people began to see Imam al-Ridha for who he really is, the Imam. And we see that there are many incidents in which Al-Ma'mun couldn't handle the truth by Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam. It is said that one day a man was brought to the palace of Al-Ma'mun. Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam was sitting. They brought this man because he stole. Apparently this man stole, it doesn't say exactly, the narration doesn't say exactly what he stole, but let's assume he stole a certain amount of money. So Al-Ma'mun began to shame him. Don't you have any fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for stealing? What did you think about the other family? And he continued to shame him for a couple of minutes until the man was allowed to speak. And the man said, the government has not provided me with any salary for the past few months. And I can't work. And I had to secure food on the table. I have a family, I have kids. What would I do? If the government did not provide me with my monthly salary, what can I do? And I can't work. So Al-Ma'mun in this case tried to act a little innocent, as if he doesn't know what's going on. He looked at the Imam and said, what is this man saying? The Imam in one sentence, one short sentence, tells exactly what's happening. He says, يقول أنك سرقت فسرق. He says, you stole, so I stole. It was a way of the Imam telling Al-Ma'mun, stop stealing. And people are fed up. And you have, as a caliph, you have no excuse to steal and hold people accountable for stealing. And there were many incidents like that Al-Ma'mun would get embarrassed by the Imam, by Imam al-Ridha. People would come up to Ma'mun and tell him, the caliph, tell him you are stealing. And Imam al-Ridha would not be shy from telling him straight to his face, yes, you are stealing. That was Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam. And it is narrated in another case that one year, Al-Ma'mun wanted Imam al-Ridha to lead the Eid prayer. Imam al-Ridha told him, I told you, my position is only by name. I don't want to lead it. Because he knows that a man like Al-Ma'mun can't really handle the traction that Imam al-Ridha gained. So he insisted. And Imam al-Ridha went. And unlike Al-Ma'mun, the Imam went, walking. He refused to go by horse. So when the ministers saw that Imam al-Ridha, the crown prince, is walking, they all had to come down from their horses and they were angry. How can I, a minister, walk? I have my horse and I should be different than most other people. And that is why immediately Al-Ma'mun sent a message to Imam al-Ridha. He sent him a messenger telling him, come back. We have a replacement for you for the salah. We don't want to bother you because you're walking and you're tired. He made a different excuse. That was Al-Ma'mun. So the set of challenges that Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam faced were unique, and not just because he was the crown prince doesn't mean that he didn't have specific challenges. Because the man who appointed him as crown prince had a different idea. He wanted the Imam to be perceived as a man that is not pious, as a corrupt man, and to have people perceive the Ahlul Bayt as such. These are not Imams. These are people who never had the chance of ruling. And when they have the chance of ruling, they will just be like me, corrupt. So that was the challenge that the Imam had to face. He had to deal diplomatically with a tyrant because of his circumstances. And we see that the Imam was able to navigate it in the best fashion possible. However, Al-Ma'mun couldn't really handle it anymore. The Imam is gaining traction. His legitimacy is being undermined by his crown prince because people love him more than he does. They're comparing the two. So he decides to take the matters into his hand. And it is narrated that he poisoned grapes or pomegranates. He poisoned them and invited the Imam to come and chat with him. When the Imam enters the room, Al-Ma'mun offers the grapes, or in another narration, the pomegranates. And the Imam refuses. Al-Ma'mun says to him, as if you're saying that I'm doing something to you. It's only food. Have some, please. It's as if you're accusing me with something. So the Imam had to eat a few of those grapes. As soon as the Imam had a few pieces, he begins to experience the pain. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Azam Allah ujurakum, brothers and sisters. The 8th Imam begins to experience the pain. He goes back to his house. He lays there in bed. And a few moments later, experiencing all the pain, his soul, his blessed soul, departs this world. Now, brothers and sisters, I want to take your mind to Medina. On such an evening, Fatima al-Zahra is spending the last moments with her father. The Muslim Ummah is experiencing the last moments of the blessed soul of Rasulullah on this earth. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Think of the pain of Fatima al-Zahra in such a moment. Spending the last day with her father, with her protector, the man who loved her more than anything else. He tells her, Bunayya, anti bad'atun minni, faman aadaki faqad aadani. ومن ظلمك فقد ظلمني. Oh Fatima, the days after me will become hard. He who hurts you has hurt me, and he who oppresses you has oppressed me. إلى الله أشكو ظالميك. All of a sudden, Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein enter the room. They go and they sit on the chest of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah begins to hug them. He begins to kiss them. Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen, tries to lift them away from the chest of the Prophet to allow the Prophet to breathe easier in the last moments. The Prophet refuses. These are my final moments, O Ali. Keep my grandchildren by my side. And then he begins to cry of what will happen to Imam al-Hassan, of what will happen in Karbala. He takes the hand of Fatima and places it in the hand of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He tells Amir al-Mu'mineen, O Ali, this is my amana in your hand. Oh Rasulullah, Fatima al-Zahra was the amana, but where were you when she was stuck between the door and the wall? Where were you when the door of Fatima al-Zahra was being burned? Where were you in Saqifa? Where were you when they annexed Fadak? And that is why Fatima al-Zahra, she goes to the grave of the Prophet a few days after his death, and she says, صُبَّتْ عَلَيَّ مَصَائِبٌ لَوْ أَنَّهَا صُبَّتْ عَلَى الْأَيَّامِ صِرْنَ لَيَالِيَا. I have experienced tragedies that if the days experienced them, they were turned into nights. All of a sudden, someone knocks on the door of the Prophet. Fatima al-Zahra goes and tells them, the Prophet is not feeling well. Go away, come back at a later time. Another knock on the door. Fatima al-Zahra goes again 3 times until Rasulullah looks at them and says, Hada Habibi Jibra'il. Jibra'il goes to visit the Prophet. And then after that, someone else knocks the door. Who is it? Rasulullah says, this is Malik al-Maut. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Malik al-Maut goes to the Prophet and tells him, you are the only person I will ever offer this option, and this is because of Allah. Do you want to stay on this earth, or do you want to go back to the Lord of this universe? But he tells him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala misses you. He says, come back. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi takes a piece of cloth, he wraps it around his hand with Amir al-Mu'mineen by his side. Suddenly Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam begins to cry. He begins to say, عظم الله أجوركم يا مؤمنين. We have lost our Prophet. We have lost the most blessed soul that has ever lived. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم، يا الله 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 يا الله. اللهم إنا نسألك بحق هذا المشهد الشريف أن تغفر لنا ذنوبنا وتغفر عنا سيئاتنا وتجعلنا من المؤمنين الأبرار. رب اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Oh Allah, we ask you for the intercession of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, the intercession of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Fatimah al-Zahra, Imam al-Hasan, Imam al-Hussein, and the Ma'soomeen from Imam al-Hussein to intercede for us on the Day of Judgment, to be there with us and not leave us alone. Stand up, brothers and sisters, for the dua of Imam al-Hujjah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة حتى تسكنه أرضك وتمتعه فيها طويلا. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
حضرت نبی جہاں سے گئے وا مصیبتا، حضرت نبی جہاں سے گئے وا مصیبتا، سر آج فاطمہ کا کھلا وا مصیبتا، حضرت نبی وا مصیبتا، حضرت سر آج فاطمہ یارو قیامت آج پری ہے جہان میں، پیٹے کرے ہے شہر خدا وا مصیبتا، نبی جہاں سے وا مصیبتا، حضرت نبی جہاں سر آج فاطمہ کہتے ہیں جبرائیل بدرگاہ کبریا، تیرا حبیب جگ سے گیا وا مصیبتا، حضرت نبی جہاں سے گئے وا مصیبتا، حضرت نبی جہاں سے گئے وا مصیبت، سر آج فاطمہ کا کھلا، یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی، یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی، یہ کیسی خبر آئی بھیا میرے یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے यूं फातिमा कहती थी भैया मेरे परदेस ये कैसी खबर पाई मरने की तुम्हारी ये कैसी खबर आई है दिल टुकड़े हो गया है भैया मेरे परदेसी फातिमा भैया मेरे परदेसी यूं फातिमा कहती थी भैया मेरे परदेसी ये कैसी खुश निकले थे वतन से फिर आए ना वतन में कैसा सफर हुआ ये भैया मेरे परदेसी यूं कहती थी भैया मेरे परदेसी यूं फातिमा कहती थी भैया मेरे परदेसी मेहमानी के हिले से बुलवाया था जालिम ने मारा तुम्हें दागा से भैया मेरे परदेसी यूं फातिमा भैया मेरे परदेसी यूं फातिमा कहती थी भैया मेरे परदेसी ये कैसी खबर भैया मेरे परदेसी सूरत अल-फातिहा मा सलवात
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Surah Fatiha is requested for the following marhumeens: Khurshid Wellington, Marhum Bahadur Wellington, Marhum Askar Nathani, Marhuma Mansura Dewji, Marhum Ali Zain Dewji, Marhum J.M. Jafar, Marhum of the Bata and Jafar family, Marhum Hussein and Marhuma Fatma Kareem, Marhum Mahmoud and Zera Habib, Marhuma Nargis Sivji, Marhum Mujtaba Baidatu, Marhum Kareem family, marhums of the Walji family, marhums of the Rajpur family, marhums of the Khakum and Kanji family, as well as the marhums of the Jivraj family and all the marhumeens in our families as well. Please recite Surah Fatiha. Just a quick announcement. So the programs for Rabi al-Awwal all the way through Jamad al-Akhir have been sent out a little later this afternoon. So please review them, and inshallah, updates will be sent out as we get closer to those programs, inshallah. Dates will get adjusted if needed, depending on the sighting of the moon. So please keep a lookout on those updates. The next program, inshallah, is planned for Thursday, October 14th, where we will commemorate the shahadat of Imam Hassan Askari alayhi salam and Bibi Masuma Yaqum salamullahi alayhi. And the program, inshallah, will start at 8:30 on that evening. Let's recite Dua Shifa for those that are sick in our family and around the world. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'a wa yakshifu su. Amma yujibul mustarra iza wa yakshifu su. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء اللهم صل على محمد.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين خصوصا سيدي بالفضل عباس وأختك زينب وبنتك سكينة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولى وابن مولى. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلطان أبا الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على